This opportunity to speak here at the 1994 family reunion of May 27th, or I guess it's the 27th today.
That's right.
It might be the 28th, I'm not sure.
It miraculously just showed up on the screen just as you said that.
That's the 27th?
Yes.
Okay, well now we've, between two lawyers, we've figured out what the day is.
What do you call it?
Okay. What's this?
What do you call this?
These are,
Oops.
are these some hymns? Who am I? I won't be. My name is Where's Scarlet O'Hara? Pretty good, huh?
Pretty good, pretty good.
It seems to me that for a hard-working lawyer, you have entirely too good a tan. You haven't been spending enough time in the courtroom. It looks like you've been spending a lot of time on the beach.
Well, it's a tanning booth. It's a tanning booth, 9 to 10 at night. You know, got to keep that image as a rich attorney.
Okay.
You know? I think we ought to get Ralph over here. We could jack this whole discussion up here and really get, get a good nickel out of it here.
Endless possibilities.
Yeah, yeah.
They run out of gas and they retired to your side.
Yeah, yeah, they did. Good.
Let's see. Oh, you mean you're talking the game here, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't been party of the game.
I'm going to get with the game.
No.
No, I haven't got it through yet.
Here comes our little kids.
The women folk have escaped.
Come on, Hopes. Whip your Generation X butt.
You're part of Generation X.
No, I missed it.
No,
I'm right in the crack between boomers and Xers.
Early 30s.
So did you mourn the death of Kurt Cobain? Hey, the sport's like a drink.
You're shooting into the sun.
There we go. Got a flash. It'll be okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Be natural.
All in a row with our arms ready.
We've got one video of your father, and he's coming right to the camera like this, and he kind of waves. So I want to make sure that you get to see that.
Okay.
Of your father. There it is. Take it, everybody. Briggs, step in.
Yeah. It's okay.
Don't try running. Don't run. Just jump over!
Ha ha ha.
No, I can see the car from here. Your car? Which is your car? Blue car? Here, look, yeah. Blue, actually, it goes there. Is that stimulus walking?
that I think is real unusual about abalone. The thing, when you get an abalone and you pop them off the rock and you bring them out, and then you pop that piece of meat out. It has meat that you can eat, and it's real expensive. It costs a lot of money. And I think the reason why it costs so much money for abalone meat is because the abalone grows so slowly. I heard in order to be legal, in order to be big enough to take, the abalone had to be at least 7 inches. So we'd have a gauge and we'd measure to make sure that they were big enough, and that the abalone would only grow about 1 inch a year. So an abalone like this is about 7 years old. And so it takes so long for them to grow that's why it's real important to try and maintain the resource. And the limit was 4. You could get 4 of these abalone every day. And so if you went down with tanks, you could harvest a whole bunch and deplete the resource. So that they were trying to maintain the resource to keep it at a sporting level. So it's a real challenge to hold your breath. And sometimes you could find abalone. Their range was anywhere from in the tide pools, where the water is, where when the tide goes out, the abalone are actually exposed, or they go out anywhere 50 to 100 feet deep. So if you have a hard time finding them in one area, you might just try and go and look in another area. But to hold your breath and go down, say, 30 feet, that's a real challenge. Yeah, you have to hold, and it's important holding your breath going down, but it's even more important holding your breath all the way back up. Well, it's actually important both ways. I think when I would make a dive, I time myself, and if I'm just sitting out, I would actually practice holding my breath, and I can hold my breath for maybe 2 minutes. But when I'm out in the ocean and my body's cold and I'm trying to conserve energy, a lot of the dives that I make would only be like 30 seconds or 45 seconds. So say if I go down and it took me about 10 seconds to get down, then I could look around for about 20 seconds, and then it would take me 10 seconds to get back up. So you're not really down there very long, but long enough to be able to look around. Yeah. What color is the meat? Kind of white. It's black around the edges, and then you pull the meat out and you clean it, and then it's about as it looks like a big foot when you get it out of the shell, and you clean it off, and then you slice it, and it's real tough. And then you pound it with a mallet, and then you kind of fry it for about 30 seconds on each side. And it has a real mild, fairly undistinguishable taste. I mean, I think my best, I've gone down a couple of times, and if there was a real good rock, if there was a whole bunch of abalone, I've been able to stay down long enough that I've popped 3 abalone off in one dive. So, and then your body temperature warms up a little bit of water, and that's what keeps you warm. So it's called a wetsuit. So when you get in, you're actually wet, but as soon as your body temperature warms the water up, then it's fairly comfortable. Uncle Kev went with me one time, and it was a particularly rough day. We were, and sometimes the waves come in, or the swells in the ocean. So we were out there, and the swells of the ocean were about 8 to 10 feet high that day. So we were out bobbing up and down, and Uncle Kev, he said, "Well, you didn't tell me I was going to have to do 2 things at once. You didn't tell me I was going to have to breathe and swim both at the same time." So Uncle Kev was staying on the inner tube and bopping up and down in these huge swells. And we were going to a new spot that day, and all we could find was sand. We couldn't find any rocks.
That's because it was swirling, because it was not a rough day, it was a tempest.
Oh, it was and I'd always had good luck getting abalone, but this one time I had invited 18 people over for dinner. And we were going to go get the abalone that day and have dinner that night. And my mother said, "Well, how do you know that you're going to get the abalone?" And I said, "Ye of little faith. I've always gotten abalone. No problem." So we went to this new spot, and we couldn't find any rocks. All we found, we just dived down, and it would just be sand, and we couldn't find any abalone. And then way up in the distance, I saw one kelp leaf that was floating around. And so I figured, aha, if there's kelp, it has to be attached to something. So I went over to that kelp, and I pulled myself, that's another little trick you use to help you get down. I pulled myself down the kelp, and so I went all the way down, and there was just one rock, and there was 3 abalone on that rock. So I popped up one, and I popped up the other, and I popped up the other, and went back to the surface, and that was all we found that whole day. So we fed our 18 people with 3 abalone that we got off one rock. Actually, that would have been a better day to go to do some body surfing, because they were really big ones.
I was about as green as the kelp, as I recall. The tail end of that story is that I had to rent everything. Rich already has all his equipment, but I had to rent the equipment. I had to rent the wetsuit, I think, and the weight belt that goes with it to solve your buoyancy problem. When you're down, you want a weight belt to keep you, to kind of neutralize your natural buoyancy. And I was riding the inner tube. It was just like riding a roller coaster, only worse. And somehow my weight belt fell off. The buckle came unbuckled and it fell off. And that was what saved me. That's how I got back into shore, because if I had had to drag that thing into shore and swim with that weight belt, I might not have made it. So it cost me, I don't know, probably $60 or $75 to go out there and get sick.
Maybe I can end just by kind of broadening it out as maybe just a conservation point that would not only have to do with the ocean or with abalone, but just with everything that we have, no matter where we live. Like I said, the resource, the Fish and Game Department, they try and manage the resource so that there's always enough abalone, and it's a real important industry in Northern California. But it's also possible to deplete the resource, and we're trying obviously to maintain it so that people can, this is something that people can enjoy for years to come. So wherever we live, there's always natural resources that are important to that area. So I would encourage all of us, and actually the kids probably know it better maybe than us as adults, because they're learning it on Mr. Rogers and on Sesame Street and in kindergarten. They know about recycling, they know about conserving water, they know about helping the planet Earth. And so maybe just to reinforce that idea that we should always try and be careful with the resources that we have so that everybody can enjoy them.
I'd like to add to that resource idea.
Yeah.
I think each of you would look at this area which these people came into here many years ago. They didn't come to a place with water, they didn't come to a place with buildings. The people that settled this area took the resources they had and improved it. And as a people, I think it'd be wise for us to improve the resources that we have and use them. And make more where there is not enough. Increase our resources and make more.
Yeah. If there's I've been doing this for hundreds of years. I've been doing this for 20 years, and myself and my mother, I think it pretty well got everybody stocked. But if there's any family who doesn't have any abalone shells, and you'd like some, there's some up here for the kids.
Get one, Abby.
Just one for a family.
One. Danny's got it.
I got you a good
Take one down, Teresa.
Area. And at that time, most glass companies were powered by coal. And most of the glass companies in this country, there were a number of them in West Virginia and in southern Ohio, not in this particular area of Ohio, and they were mostly powered with coal. When natural gas was discovered in a town near Fostoria, in Finley, they piped throughout the town this natural gas, and they left their natural gas lights running day and night, so the town was brilliantly lit. And Fostoria was rather jealous of this because they did not have a natural gas well so close by. Some of the other town promoters decided that they would like to have the same sort of natural gas boom, and they wanted to pipe to the nearest well, which was a number of miles away. Foster said not to do this because he felt that this natural gas was going to run out eventually, but the others didn't believe him. So they piped this gas from a number of miles away into Fostoria, and what they did was they went to West Virginia and into southern Ohio and tried to persuade the existing glass companies to move there because it was going to give us free gas. And the town was going to provide free gas, which was in this well miles away, to any industry that would come there. We do that now often. We want to lure a big company to town with tax breaks and that sort of thing. Foster still said this is not a good idea, this is going to run out. And nobody listened to him, so a number of glass companies started in 1887. And the first ones just made regular old window glass. And then a number of people started thinking about making more decorative glassware. The Fostoria Glass Company was started by, it was a new company, but it was started by people from West Virginia. And they started with a pattern called Cascades. And you should all feel free to come look at this. But this was in 1887, this little pattern that had lots of swirls through it. And it was popular for a number of years. And later on, and even until recently, you can find some of these pieces and you can find a pattern that is rather similar to this. But it was when they came out with their Victoria pattern that the company just boomed. And that is on these two pages, and it's a funny little swirl that sort of looks like an F, and it's deeply etched into this, it's deeply into this glassware. This glass gave the company its real name, was identified with the company for years and years and years, for the first number of years. This glass uses molds. It's blown into molds, and the patterns come from the molds, from the impressions in the molds. So it's not just hand blown, it was blown into a mold, and that's where the pattern came from. This is the Victoria pattern. And we have a family friend whose ancestors were from that area of West Virginia. And just as we've heard the name Fostoria for years, the people in that area also thought that this was just a wonderful sort of glass. The company kept going and growing and became one of the popular glass companies through the 1940s, 50s, into the 60s.
Were they using coal or gas at that time?
They had, I don't know what they used. It certainly wasn't free natural gas anymore.
It was coal.
It was back to coal.
It was coal.
Okay. Have you been to the plant there in Moundsville?
Yeah.
You can still, it closed in the late 1880s. There are still some pieces being made by another glass company in Indiana, and there are still things you can find. And interestingly, when Rick and I,
80s or 90s?
excuse me, 1990.
Well, what it was when the transfer of the great power of energy came, the energy crush came. And what they were doing was they had to keep it fired night and day because they take 8 hours to fire one glass. And so that with that great energy drop, having it to go night and day, they couldn't afford to run it
anymore
the whole
They had
time.
only one oven.
They had one oven, and so then they had to,
Couldn't afford
because
to
of
keep
the
it
great
up in the energy
drain
problems in the
during that
70s
time.
and 80s.
they had to taper that down.
Well, when the Fostoria name was clearly well enough known that when Rick and I were married in 1987, in addition to some wonderful pieces of Fostoria that we got from Aunt Valerie, we were given a piece by Rick's brother that was called Fostoria, and it was made in Romania.
Yeah.
And so, isn't that interesting? This Victoria pattern, which is really rather lush, and let me tell you, if you ever see it anyplace, nab it up, and I'll guarantee you that I can find you a purchaser for this pattern who could multiply your investment in this. This pattern, which had put Fostoria Glass Company on the map, when they loaded up all the molds to move from Ohio to West Virginia, there was an inventory made, and all the molds were on the loading dock and ready to go. Somebody made a complete inventory of all those molds. When they got to West Virginia, this mold was not there and has never been found. So clearly somebody wanted that company to either stay in Fostoria, Ohio, or go belly up later. And interestingly, the company has never made these molds again, so they never tried to revive this pattern. But it's a little story of intrigue there. A pattern that you'll perhaps see that Grandma particularly liked, and what I like about this is you can look through this book, which has a lot of glassware from the time period when she would have been buying things. A lot of the pieces are really frou-frou and fussy, and you will note that the stuff that Grandma had was simple and beautiful and just had a few identifying features that made it really elegant. This is called the Fostoria Century pattern. The defining part, you can pass these around. The defining characteristic is this little swirl here. It sort of looks like a blob of glass that's been extruded out into kind of an elongated teardrop piece. This piece right here is what identifies that pattern. Now, this pattern Grandma collected as a simple plain pattern, and you can still find it. These are pieces that I have purchased recently, one in my own little neighborhood. Many of these pieces also had etchings put on them, but again, and this is a number of pieces of the pattern. Some of them had, once it was made, blown into the molds, then it was etched later, so you might get roses, or there's camellias, and a variety of patterns that are etched onto the glass. She stuck with the simple, elegant stuff that could go with just about anything.
Ricky.
Yeah?
Well, unless only because Uncle Ras carried 2 patterns.
Uncle Ras what? Carried 2 patterns?
He carried
Yes.
2 patterns. There were only 2 patterns
that he carried
in the snows in that department.
She chose the better of the two. That's marvelous. Well, that shoots an academic's theory.
Good God, what can we say? It was the truth.
It is still clear to me that it was an elegant choice.
That it was absolutely elegant.
And it was an elegant choice, and I use mine, put berries in them and all that sort of thing. There are some. You can pass this page around too, and you can see some of the pieces. And again, if you see those anywhere, they're great fun to have and to kind of think that we're continuing on Grandma's collection. I'm not sure of the years that some of these things were purchased, and if the sisters know, I would love to know if you know when particular things were purchased. Another pattern that Grandma had, which I don't have pictures of, is called Candlewick, and that was also very popular, and you'll see in a lot of collectible shops. And that is nice. It's also fairly simple glassware like this, but instead of having the little blobs that are kind of extruded out into teardrop shapes, it's got little balls all the way around. The original pattern that was made was very delicate light blobs. There are lots with sort of big balls around. But she had big serving fruit bowls of that and punch bowls of that as well. This is another pattern that I think is great fun that Grandma had a serving bowl of, and she may have had other pieces as well. This is a little sugar dish that I picked up, and it's called an iris and herringbone pattern, for the irises here and the herringbones here. And again, as far as frou-frou goes, this is still a fairly simple piece. You want to look at that one, and that came in. That also came in an iridescent orange. Again, this seems to me that Grandma stuck with the simpler stuff. You can go to Fostoria, Ohio, and there's a little, like I say, a little tiny museum there of the first few years that Fostoria was in Fostoria. There were other glass companies there, and it's great fun to learn about. You can see some of the glass factories that are still up and staying there. And Moundsville, West Virginia, is also was the home for the many, many, many years. And it's interesting because they were only in Fostoria for about 4 years, but they maintained that name throughout all their history. There are also some great outlet stores.
The question I have, and it's really is that I don't know for sure, and maybe you research this, is when we see this Romanian glass that says Phosphora, whether indeed they have moved to plant there. My understanding that the real Phosphora no longer is made.
That's right.
Libby's has bought the plant. And so the actual hand-blown, or the blown Phosphora, so if you've got a piece, it's a treasure.
That might,
it's collectors, because the stuff you get now is not the same.
Are you recording?
Yeah.
Are you getting sound too?
Yeah.
What sounds are you getting?
Boy, am I ever.
I want to get one that has your fingers confined
Okay, sit up nice and tall. Turn your face right towards me. I want to see your face. Normal, I want to see mine out. Ready? On three. One, wait, slow. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I got an elbow in here. Where's his elbow?
You gotta wait.
Tall. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Okay, we got this. Wait this second.
Two more.
life, really. I know you have always regretted not giving Mormon to your father, but you did talk against the church, and I suppose you thought he would make fun of you.
That is one of the regrets of my life. Father was a deep thinker and a liberal-minded man, and would have enjoyed reading it, as it contains a history of the ancient inhabitants of America. Now I realize it would have been interesting to him.
It seemed like a long time to get the necessary money for all of us to come. When we finally had the money, we thought our worries were over. We boarded the Zeppelin with such high hopes and had to wait 2 weeks and then another 6 weeks crossing the Atlantic Ocean voyage. It was a happy day when we reached the shores of America.
Oh yes, we felt like such strangers in a stranger land. The trip up the Mississippi River was much easier sailing. St. Louis was an interesting place where we met old friends from England and made new friends in the gospel.
Staying in St. Louis, we constantly had to remind ourselves of why we came to America, why we had left our families that we missed so much. We came because of the gospel of Latter-day Saints, we journeyed to the Valley of the Saints in Salt Lake.
That terrible cholera broke out and so many were sick among us. You, James, were so faithful to go among the saints and administer to them and brought comfort to them and helped them bury their dead.
What a terrible time for me when you were so sick for 6 weeks. You didn't know from hour to hour whether you would live or die. You were such a pitiful sight, your bones had worn through your skin. Many times the elders administered to you, and through the healing power of the Lord you were healed. For us, our 9-year-old Rebecca and our new baby James both died, and we buried them in the same grave.
You sold your business, James, and with the money we were able to buy 2 yoke of oxen and a wagon with other supplies to start our trip across the 1,000
Perfect.
miles.
Better zoom in on them.
All those ornery oxen. I knew about horses. They are very smart animals. The oxen are sturdy and can pull a heavy load, but they're not very smart. And you have to stay with them and guide them every step. They really try to manage. It's a long, weary journey.
We were in Springville, Utah for 9 years, and our 3 youngest daughters, Lavina, Rosina, and Althea, were born.
When Joseph Birch, our son-in-law, encouraged us to move to southern Utah, I thought how nice to go to a warm climate. I kept buying land and fencing it. I was surprised that I soon had 100 acres. I never could have gotten those 100 acres into crops without the help of the young Danish orphan boy, Althea Gregerson. His help was worth the board and clothes we were able to give him.
Yes, the girls were so interested in helping him with his reading and numbers. They had a good time as they all learned together. We really missed him when he left. The first winter you built us a nice 2-room log cabin, but the water that flooded the area found us standing in 2 feet of water, so we moved to higher ground. But we had to move again when the Black Hawk Indian War broke out. This time it was into a fort for mutual protection against the Indian raids.
I was a Minuteman in the Home Guard and spent 2 nights a week guarding the town. These were fearful times. It lasted 4 years. When the Indian War ceased, we decided to once again go to the Dixie country. We left the children in Canara and went on to St. George to visit our daughter Mary. On the way back, we located and started a new home in Ventura. The tent, Bowery, and wagon box gave us shelter until late in the fall, when we moved into the basement of our new rock house.
James, you never wanted the girls to have to do heavy work, farm work, but those 4 children were so happy to pile, burn the brush, clear the land of rocks.
Yes, the children were great helpers. Why, in 2 years we had cut and planted great cuttings, fruit trees, and had a productive garden.
We had been in this Dixie country 6 years when we had that wonderful visit from our Danish boy, Althea Gregerson. Wasn't he handsome when he drove up with that team of bay horses, a new wagon, and a store-bought suit?
It was a wonderful reunion for all of us. Remember how surprised he was to see the girls all grown, especially Althea. He came in May, and they were married in December. It was an honor to have him in the family.
It was a very rewarding time. We were happy we had such a good garden and had plenty to eat. It was difficult to get clothes, so I started to knit socks to sell to the peddlers that stopped by the house, and they paid a good price. I taught the girls to knit socks also. While we girls all were knitting, you would read to us. Those were pleasant winter evenings. I took pride in teaching the children reading, writing, and spelling. You, James, always made our evenings so enjoyable with music. First you played the accordion, then the violin, and finally the organ. Remember how you made a dummy keyboard that everyone practiced on? When we finally could afford an organ, we all could play.
Yes, I always played some musical instrument and really enjoyed the evenings when traveling musicians would stop overnight. We always had someone staying overnight.
It's now 1888, and we have been here since 1868. All the children are married, and we appreciate the good life we have here in this sunny clime. 20 years in Dixie, and we have enjoyed it all. I often think of England and our home and family that we left back in 1850. It really took courage to come to this new land for religious purposes.
Yes, Rebecca, but we've been blessed in our love of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It has been our rod and our staff, and I'm sure we would do it all over again if we had to.
I, Althea Gregerson Hafen, have been thinking about my short life. When I was less than 1 year old, my father was killed in one of the wars between Denmark and Germany. My mother was given a widow's pension, and she managed to only care for us and she completely together. When I was about 12, Mormon elders came and visited our area. After considerable research, my mother and I were both baptized and converted to the church. After that, there was much enthusiasm on immigrating to Zion in the United States. My mother did not have enough money for two to go, so she decided that I should go on my own with our neighbors in Madison, and she would follow in a year or two. I thought I would have no trouble because I had taken some English classes in school, and that it would be wonderful to go. I often think of the day that I left my mother. It was hard to just feel at home, say, because of the train ride and the boat ride. I had never been on either of these before in my life. And my mother was about to come in here, but I had no idea that it was going to be this hard to learn a new language and to be able to earn my own money. I was one of 1,500 Danish immigrants who left Hamburg, Germany in June 1862, who were joined by 500 Scandinavian saints. It was over 7 months of weeks on the ocean across to New York. Then, after we went from New York, we went to Chicago and then to Morris, Nebraska by the train. When we finally left in July 14th, we had 80 wagons and 500 souls full of freight. I thought my mother often. But I did not feel very homesick until the time when we went across the long, trudging mountains. It was very hard. I found that there was much a 13-year-old boy could do. I could take care of the oxen, horse, mule, cows, and many other animals. And also, I could light the fires in the early morning, the afternoon, and for the evening meal. I continued to struggle and press forward until we reached the Great Salt Lake Valley on September 3rd, 1862. I was sent to Provo and was employed taking care of the, quote, town herd. It was difficult for me to learn English, for even though I had taken the classes, it was much harder to actually speak the language than to actually learn it in school. Since I could not speak English, and nobody except my neighbors could speak Danish, I was in a bit of a fix. I had been in the United States nearly 2 years when I met Brother James Sylvester. He gave me board, clothes, and part of the crops as our wages. He had 4 daughters that taught me that were my own teachers. One for math, one for science, one for English, and then the other for spelling bees. We cleared and planted 100 acres of virgin land into grain. He also taught me how to get an honest day's work and to be honest in all my dealings. He was well versed in the gospel of Jesus Christ and particularly and patiently explained and taught it to me. Mrs. Sylvester made me part of the family. They were a happy family and they sang a lot. We read the Bible and discussed it. On Sundays, we went to church. Mother Sylvester told me they were all my folks, no matter where. It made me feel good to have a family and to know that I was wanted and
now 18. It's been 5 years since I left Denmark and my beloved mother. I hope she will be able to come soon to be with me. I have been busy since I left the Sylvesters. I went to Marysvale to work in the gold mine and was discovered there. While working there, Indian troubles broke out, and we were 3 weeks with very little food or ammunition. We were so weak that when help arrived, we could scarcely crawl out to the mine. Brigham Young called me to help move the Saints from the Mississippi River to Salt Lake City. Once again, cholera broke out, but I knew how to make big kettles of tea to help those who were sick. I had been asked to ride the Pony Express in the Gunnison Military District. I rode from Sevier River, Elsinore, Salina, Glenwood, Ridgefield, Gunnison, and Manatee. There's been a lot of trouble with the Indians in the settlements, and care is needed. Southern Utah has long been the home of Paiute and Navajo Indians who originally claimed to gain vegetation and the lands. At first, the relationships were friendly, but then as more and more settlers moved in and established settlements and began to consume the resources that were there, the relationships became unhappy. So, when the Black Hawk War with the Indians ended, I heard of the Continental Railway coming from the east and west. I found work cutting timber from the Wasatch Mountains. I helped cut the timber, stripped it, peeled the bark, and slid the logs down the mountainside to be made into railroad ties. I was at Promontory Point, Utah, and witnessed the driving of the Golden Spike. It was on May 9, 1869, when the two big railroad engines met coming from east to west there in Promontory. I was able to buy a strong wagon and a fine span of horses with the money I earned from working on the railroad. The man said, "I'll pay you cash." I had always dealt with the LDS tithing script, and I didn't know what cash was. I decided to go to the silver mines in Nevada with my wagon and my fine span of horses. For 6 years, I hauled vegetables in and or out. These years became a valuable education for me. I learned how to make contracts. I learned to judge character. I was constantly gathering knowledge of minerals and the workings of mines. I bought mining books and studied them. I learned to look at a hill and study its outcroppings, its color, its location, and texture. I found out where the heavy loads of ore were, and I found out how much the horses could pull. My old friends, the James Sylvesters, had made their home in Ventura these 6 years that I had been freighting. I am homesick to see them, so I've decided that if I can find, I'd like to go see them down in the warm Dixie climate. I want them to see my fine bays and new wagon. My store-bought clothes are different from the ones I had when I left. I'm sure I can find their place, as they say it is, in a rock house that they have built with their own hands. The yellow roses will be in bloom now that it is May. Lavina, that I was interested in, is now married to William Barry, with 3 children. And I suppose that the young girls of the family are grown up. The welcome was just as I'd hoped for. The Sylvesters greeted me as one of their own. So many things were the same, just as I'd hoped they would be. The clean home, the orchard in bloom, the great arbor and grazing land. It proved that the Lord had blessed these good people and the fruits of their labor. What I was not prepared for was how the young girls were now beautiful young women, especially Althea. When I left, she was 13, and now an enchanting woman of 19. It wasn't too many days before I made known my love for her. She accepted my proposal and said she always loved me. As soon as I can earn a wedding stake, we will be married in the St. George Temple. The date is set for December 20th, 1878.
It was so interesting that silver was discovered at Silver Reef, 15 miles from Ventura, just as the mines in Nevada were petering out. This was in 1876, just 2 years before we were married. After we were married, I started hauling machinery from the railroad to Milford and the mines in Nevada to Silver Reef. As Ventura was on the road, on the main road, I could stop and see you as I came and went with the team and wagons. After little Rosa was born, it was such a happy day for me to move you to Silver Reef. It was a bustling mining town, but you didn't seem to mind. Silver Reef was so unusual, the first time to discover silver in sandstone. Many geologists wouldn't believe such a thing could happen.
It was a life so different from anything I had ever known, dressing up each afternoon for tea. It was the Christie Mining Company that gave us this beautiful etched silver tea set. But I soon tired of the social world. In November of 1881, our little Andrew Eric was born. We were so happy to have a daughter and a son.
With the money coming in so regular, we were able to buy the Johnson place in Ventura for $4,000.
Mr. Johnson was a renowned agriculturalist. He had built up a very exceptional place with every kind of fruit and grape. He sent to France and California for the wonderful grapes. He had several varieties of yellow and white peaches, all kinds of apples, plums, pears, and almonds. I decided that I'd better go back and run the ranch, or you could stop on your runs back and forth with the railroad.
You had had good training from your parents. You had helped clear the land and planted the garden and learned the time and season for planting the various crops. So you went with vigor on our own place.
It was at the ranch that we had all 10 of our children. Never a doctor, but you insisted that the midwife stay for 2 weeks before the baby was born and for a month after. I never had anything to ease the pain of childbirth.
Ventura was a day's drive either way from Cedar City and St. George. It was a natural stopping place. You soon had paying and non-paying people staying the night. Those who paid had food and a bed in the house. The non-paying slept in the barn outside.
The work at Silver Reef lasted for 10 years. Those were good wages and a ready market for all the fruits and vegetables that we could raise on the ranch. We had the ranch paid for by the time you were through there.
I moved the big machinery, teams, and equipment to Pioche, Nevada to work on a road they were building. I had a crew of Irishmen working for me. This was in 1890.
This was when we went to the town meeting in St. George and they were discussing the St. George Dam. The floods kept washing out every dam they constructed.
They had chosen a new site for the dam. I told them I had fine construction equipment, which I would furnish and would take water strip for pay. The crew of Irishmen who were skilled rock experts said they would work for board and water strip. They must have done a good job, for that dam has held 30 years now.
The years of 1893 to 1896 were such difficult years. Those were the years of a great panic. Farm prices were down. You went to Arizona to work in the mines there.
I was always glad that the children were interested in school. They had to leave Ventura to get their education. It made me dang proud when each one of our 8 children received their diplomas. I just couldn't hold back the tears as I know how important education is.
Yes, Rose, Arthur, and Andrew all went to the branch normal in Cedar City. Grant, James, and Althea graduated from St. George Academy. Lyle, Dorothy from Dixie College, and Grant graduated from Denver Dental College. James graduated as a lawyer from the University of Utah, and Rose, Althea, Lyle, and Dorothy all taught school.
One of the great sorrows of my life is that my mother never came to this country.
We will always remember that November day in 1901 when this letter, etched in black, came.
For 40 years, I hope that next year she would be able to come. Just think, she didn't see one of our 10 children.
You were always so good to my mother, who lived the last 10 years of her life with us. She appreciated the tenderness that you showed her.
When I was a 15-year-old boy, she told me I could call them family, and I've loved her like a mother.
It has been a good life, Andrew. We both worked very hard, but we have had many happy times. These last years, Brother Ivans and Snow have encouraged you to see if you could find a mine that would bring industry into the region.
Yes, the copper mines were good finds and will produce and help the economy, but the big thrill was when I found gold. Remember putting my arms around you and saying, "We've struck it this time, Alec." The Hamburg, Dora Jane, and Paymaster will be lifeblood for a long time, I hope.
You left Denmark as a 13-year-old boy for the gospel of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It has been such a guiding influence in your life.
Now these last few years we've been able to work in the temple. I especially am pleased with the number of Danish names I have been able to do. Another important event in my life was the day in 1877 I received my naturalization papers. I have never missed voting. To vote is such a privilege.
I always smile when I remember your advice to me every time that you left on one of your trips. Keep the children's shoes on, there are snakes about. And keep the matches out of the way. We don't want the dang house to burn down. You worried me because you traveled so much at night.
Sure, but the horses knew the way and I could get my sleep and be ready to do a day's work when I arrived at my destination.
It has been a good life. May we have many more years.
Everybody knows that what she wants is a family group sheet from every family for the genealogy, so she can compile the genealogy for the family. So I've got them here. I've got family group records that we'll pass out to everybody. They'd like everybody, the head of the family, to get together and fill out the kids, and so they hand them back to me, or give them back to Andy Lane somehow. Give them to me, and I'll give them to Andy Lane to get them sorted out. Those of us in the red shirts, you don't need to worry about it. I've already got it printed up for you guys, so it'll just be like a $5 service charge on that. I mentioned that if you go and have a chance to get on the computer and check out the ancestral file, Elaine's done a lot of work, and there are a lot of names that she's put in on the ancestral file that the church has on record. And I was able to go into my genealogy class today and this last semester at Briggs. I was able to take a bunch of those names off the ancestral file and put them on my own personal file. But this is all the work that Andy Lane's done, and she has to do.
I just wanted to mention again that it was Elaine that compiled the scripts for all of us who read those scripts. So that was her.
I've got a couple of paganisms I'd like to lay on you. Your father, your husband, your brother, your grandfather, great-grandfather, Earl Hafen, used to have some very great sayings. He'd look at me now as I'm standing up here in my emaciated condition and say, you look a little drag-assy. He had a lot of them. I want to bring out another Hafen here. Max Hafen used to be a great host down at the Mesquite down there. When we go down there at Easter time, old Max would get this team of horses on this flatbed, rubber tired. He'd say, come on, let's go down here and see the cows and eat $100 worth of hay a day. And they had a reunion similar to this at one time. Somebody got up talking about finances. Max was always a little sensitive about money. Somebody was talking about how much they owed. He said, hell, I owe $80,000. And this is somewhat analogous to that. But 3 weeks ago tomorrow, I had my second angioplasty. I'd had one 2 weeks previous to that didn't work. And they took me in 3 weeks ago and we did it. And I think the jury's still out on whether it's going to work or not. But when Max was talking about that cattle feed, it was really chicken feed in comparison to what the cost of these two angioplasties is going to cost. The cost of those angioplasties and angiograms I had will exceed $100,000. So Max, that's chicken feed. I'd like to make a few observations here. We're living in an ever-changing society. This group has managed somehow to survive inflation and deflation, depression and recession, abundance and scarcity, rationing and price controls, wars and rumors of wars, and the end of the misery is not in sight. And there was a time when only a fool and his money were soon covered. Now it happens to everybody. It develops that the best time to buy anything was last year. Everything is bass backwards today. A woman carries her money to the grocery store with a shopping cart and packs her groceries home in her purse. There's one thing for sure, if you want to teach your children to value the dollar, you better hurry. With moccasins, casuals, slip-ons, buckles, and Velcro, a person can earn a PhD and never have to learn to tie his own shoes. I took the car to the service station the other day for an oil change, and the young upstart employed to do the work had the cheek to advise me to keep the oil and change the car. There are kinds of fads rampant in the land today, transcendental meditation with the Reverend Moon and various kinds of yoga from the Far East. When we were kids, our parents taught us how to meditate. They said, sit down and shut up. But all this aside, children are a great comfort in their old age, and they help us to reach it faster too. Every year it takes less time to fly across the ocean and longer to drive to work. Finally, we're compelled to agree with Mark Twain. There is no distinctly Native American criminal class except Congress. It's getting harder and harder to support the government in the style in which it has become accustomed. Rob, would you go give me a little glass of water and get dry in the mouth, please? If Patrick Henry thought taxation without representation was bad, he should see how bad it is with representation. Americans used to shout, give me liberty. Now they leave off the last word. If you're a born worrier, you were born at the right time. But enough of that. Time won't permit us to recount all of the magnificent virtues and philanthropies of this illustrious group. But we have made a careful study of all your noteworthy attainments and have discovered a common but prominent thread running through all your lives. Every one of us here considers himself a philosopher. Of this discovery, it was only natural that we should secure a few gems of wisdom, of observation, and enlightenment for the medical profession here today. Greg Hafen, Gilbert Hafen, Jeff Rogers, Norman Hafen, and different types of medicine, of course. Pills to be taken in twos always come out of the bottles in threes. If you're here to help others, what are the others here for? It's better to be rich and healthy than poor and sick. If it feels good, don't do it. Never go to a doctor whose office plants have died. Toothaches tend to occur on Saturday nights. Aches in the posterior can be provoked anytime. The difference between amnesia and magnesia is well developed, well defined. The guy with amnesia doesn't know where he's going, and the guy with magnesia doesn't know when. When you're warned to slow down by the doctor instead of the police, you have reached middle age. When your bill for surgery arrives, you will learn why those guys are wearing masks. When a dentist is down in the mouth, the patient feels a whole lot worse. Is that right, Gil? Halitosis is better than no breath at all. For the education people here, we have distilled these rules and comments. This is the first time this has been announced, that our new principal for the Dixie High School is one Craig Hammer. Where the devil are you, Craig? Where are you, Craig? I think it's important for him to know some of these, but we'll pass these along for several others. That's Marcia Hammer, Michelle North, Greg Hafen, Bill Sample, Richard Briggs, Allison Chapman, Ron Miller, and Steve Meade, and Kevin and Miriam Briggs, all have been teachers of some sort or other. These are some rules and comments that should be applied to the education program. When in doubt, mumble. When in trouble, delegate. And when in charge, ponder. Off the top of the head, ideas are often like dandruff, small but flaky. Cross-eyed teachers can't control their pupils. The universal aptitude for ineptitude makes human accomplishment an incredible miracle. Remember, this goes for Craig. Remember that not all the faculty have their faculties. Ignorance combined with silence is sometimes mistaken for wisdom. Education is the process of moving from cocksure ignorance to thoughtful uncertainty. There's a difference between an open mind and a hole in the head. Wisdom consists of knowing when to avoid perfection. A hole in the bottom of a bird's nest usually means she likes laying eggs but doesn't like children. Increased earnings always brings increased yearnings. For the law profession here, we have Ralph and Mark Hafen, Tancred King, Robert and Kevin Briggs. We've come up with these postulates and conclusions. He who shouts the loudest has the floor. People can be divided into three groups: those who make things happen, and those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what did happen. If God had intended us to travel tourist class, He would have made us narrower and shorter. One of the things that keeps the world in turmoil is the unusual attraction of strong lungs for weak minds. A reasonable amount of fleas is good for a dog. It keeps him from brooding over being a dog. Logic is a systematic method of coming to the wrong conclusion with confidence. All warranty and guarantee clauses become void immediately prior to the first breakdown. The human being is the only animal that can be skinned more than once. When a cat is in the bird cage, he isn't there to sing. A sure way to keep crime from paying is to let the government run it. The more you run over a dead cat, the flatter it gets. Never play leapfrog with a unicorn. What the large print giveth, the small print taketh away. Money doesn't make you happy, but it certainly quiets your nerves. Elaine, you're on.
We are blessed to have so many young children with talent. And I think we will start with Christian Briggs, and his mother will play a piano duet. And they will be followed by Brian Van Scoy, and then Gabriel.
So without further ado, I'd like to introduce President Bush. President Bush.
Thank you very much. That was quite a tough act to follow there. I don't know if I can quite top that, but I was back up there in Kennebunk Port talking to Gorby. You know, we always had a good time chatting there. And we were talking about Clinton, and Gorby says to me, you know, he talks to me all the time. He goes, "Hey Bush, you know, you guys are really going to be paying through the nose with that new healthcare plan." I says, "I know, it's going to be hurting us, but we got to persevere. We got to persevere through all that because we're a tough country, and well, you know, the Hafens, they're a good bunch of people. I know that." But I see we have to leave, so I'll be talking to you. I'll see y'all tonight at there's a banquet or something. All right, I'll talk to you then. Bye.
nibble, nibble, crunch, crunch.
picture with me some 12 years later. A conference has been called under the direction of Brigham Young, his colonizer, the statesman. And he will say, brothers and sisters, we have met as a council, and we have discussed, and we have decided to colonize America.